It was the summer of 1519, when the people of northern Italy witnessed something they could not explain. Villagers woke at dawn to the sound of marching. Not just footsteps, but the rhythmic clash of weapons, the metallic thunder of unseen legions moving through the mist. Men climbed the hills to look, expecting soldiers, mercenaries, perhaps an invading army. But there was nothing, only empty fields. Yet the sound continued. Drums, horses, the sharp call of a commander's horn, echoing from nowhere. Some swore they saw the outlines of men, soldiers in armor from another time, flickering in and out of the morning haze. Others said they could hear the cries of battle, but not one living soul was in sight. By nightfall, the terrified villagers fled to nearby towns, spreading a single message: an army of ghosts is marching through Italy. The year was 1519, and this event would soon become one of Europe's strangest, most chilling mysteries. Italy, at the time, was a land torn apart. Wars, famine, and plague had carved deep scars across its soil. Empires fought for control: the French, the Spanish, the Papal States, each leaving behind the echoes of death and despair. And amid this chaos, a story began to spread. Reports poured in from the countryside of Modena, Parma, and Reggio Emilia, all describing the same impossible vision: a vast army marching through the clouds. Priests called it a divine omen. Scholars dismissed it as hysteria. But the common people, they believed something far darker was at play. According to the chroniclers of the time, entire villages gathered to watch as what appeared to be legions of armored men drifted above the earth. Some said they saw banners, red and black, flapping in the wind. Others described hearing words in Latin, as if the dead themselves were chanting in unison. The scene was silent and deafening all at once. A ghostly army, seen by hundreds, vanishing before their eyes. And it wasn't just one village. The ghost army of 1519 was reported across miles of Italian countryside. The same sounds, the same visions at the same time. How could so many people witness the same impossible thing? And why did it happen in a year already drowning in superstition and fear? To understand this mystery, we have to step into the world of 16th century Italy, a world on edge. The year 1519 was no ordinary year. It was the dawn of the Renaissance, yes, but also an age of paranoia. The Black Death had ravaged Europe just a century earlier. The wars between France and the Holy Roman Empire had left cities burned, families broken, and faith deeply shaken. Superstition ruled the countryside. If crops failed, it was the devil's doing. If someone fell ill, it was a curse. And when strange things appeared in the sky, it could only be a sign from God. Chroniclers like Sebastiano da Parma and Girolamo Cardano recorded strange omens across Italy in that same period. Fiery crosses seen at dusk, blood-colored rain, and glowing lights drifting over battlefields. To people living in 1519, heaven and hell weren't abstract ideas, they were part of daily life. The unseen world was as real as the one beneath their feet. So when hundreds began describing a phantom army, moving through the clouds, clashing swords, and marching toward Rome, it wasn't hard for them to believe that something otherworldly was unfolding. But here's the eerie part. Multiple witnesses claimed the army seemed alive. They said the soldiers were moving in formation, like a real military force. They spoke of hearing commands shouted in languages no one recognized. Some even claimed to see flashes of light as weapons struck, as if invisible forces were fighting in the heavens. And this wasn't the first time something like it had happened. Records show that similar ghostly armies had been sighted centuries earlier, in ancient Rome, in medieval France, and even in the fields of England before major wars. Each time, the vision of spectral soldiers seemed to come as a warning, a sign of disaster to come. And in 1519, disaster was indeed coming. That same year, plague outbreaks swept through Italian cities. Political assassinations shook noble families. And just 2 years later, in 1521, the Italian wars would erupt into one of the bloodiest campaigns in European history. Was the Ghost Army a prophecy, a supernatural omen of death to come? Or could it have been something else, something explainable, yet just as strange? In a time when the boundaries between science and superstition blurred, the line between reality and the beyond was paper thin. And in the summer of 1519, that line seemed to vanish completely. In the next part, we'll examine the eyewitness accounts in detail. What did people truly see? Were there clues hidden in their descriptions? And could natural phenomena, like mirages or celestial events, explain the vision of a marching army that terrified Italy? Stay with us. You're listening to Mystery Fact File. As dawn broke over the rolling hills of northern Italy in 1519, the townspeople of Modena awoke to the sound of distant drums. They thought it was thunder, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. Soon, riders came rushing through the streets, breathless and pale, shouting warnings. An army is coming, thousands strong. Farmers dropped their tools. Merchants closed their stalls. Priests rang the church bells to summon prayers and repentance, because what they were told defied all sense. An army had appeared out of nowhere, not from France, not from the Papal States, not from the Holy Roman Empire. It was a phantom host, marching silently through the mists, their banners glimmering like faded gold in the morning light. Witnesses described soldiers wearing armor centuries old, rusted but gleaming as if lit from within. Some swore they heard no footsteps, only the faint echo of marching long after the figures had vanished. Others said the air grew heavy and cold as they approached, the sound of trumpets echoing from unseen lips. By mid-morning, word spread to nearby villages. Reports varied. Some claimed to see thousands of soldiers, others only a handful. But all agreed on one thing: these men were not alive, and yet they moved with purpose. They marched in formation. They even carried banners bearing symbols that no one could recognize, emblems lost to history. Local militias gathered, terrified but determined to defend their lands. But when they reached the fields where the ghostly army had been seen, they found no footprints, no armor, no trace of movement at all. The soil was undisturbed, the grass untouched. It was as if the earth itself refused to record their passing. Still, the stories didn't stop there. Days later, shepherds reported seeing lights flickering across the hills at night, as if from campfires that no longer burned. Travelers spoke of voices whispering in Latin or Old Italian, chanting battle cries that hadn't been heard since the Crusades. And when priests performed blessings on the sites of these sightings, they said the ground trembled, as if something beneath was struggling to rise again. But what was this army? Why 1519? And why Italy? To understand the meaning behind the phantom soldiers, we have to step back to a world consumed by war, faith, and fear. The early 1500s were an age of chaos in Italy. The land was divided among powerful city-states, Florence, Venice, Milan, and each fought for control. Above them loomed greater powers: the Holy Roman Empire, the Papacy, and the Kingdom of France. Armies crisscrossed the land, leaving behind ruin and plague. But the year 1519 was special. It marked the death of Emperor Maximilian I, and with it came the uncertainty of succession across Europe. In that same year, the Reformation began to ignite Germany. The spiritual and political world was breaking apart. So imagine if an army of the dead did appear. It was at a time when the living had begun to question everything: God, sin, and the nature of power itself. Chroniclers from the region described the apparition as a vision of divine warning. One monk wrote, "The host of spirits came not to fight, but to remind men that wars of greed summon the armies of hell." Others took a darker view. They believed the phantom soldiers were the restless souls of warriors who had died in earlier battles, the Italian wars that had ravaged the land for decades. Perhaps their bodies were buried without last rites. Perhaps their names were forgotten. In the Catholic imagination of the time, purgatory was not a metaphor. It was a real, burning place just beyond the veil of the living world. And many believed that sometimes, when the sins of nations grew too great, the veil could tear. The so-called Ghost Army of 1519 might have been seen as a divine omen, a warning from the dead that more suffering was to come. And indeed it was. Because within just a few years, Italy would be plunged into the bloodiest conflicts of the century. The sack of Rome in 1527 would leave tens of thousands dead, the churches desecrated, and the papacy shaken to its core. Did the phantom soldiers foretell this catastrophe? Or were they something far stranger, something beyond religion, beyond reason? One report from an anonymous soldier claimed he saw the ghostly host vanish into the clouds, as if absorbed by the heavens. Another claimed they were seen again weeks later, this time marching toward the Alps, disappearing into mist that never lifted. Whatever they were, they never returned. But for centuries, their story did not die. In the archives of Modena and Parma, fragments of letters still remain, scribes describing the panic, the bells, the prayers. And in some rural villages, old families still tell the tale of gli spiriti guerrieri, the warrior spirits, who march unseen on foggy mornings, reminding the living that war always comes at a cost. Centuries have passed, and yet the enigma of the 1519 Ghost Army still haunts historians, skeptics, and believers alike. How do we explain an event witnessed by dozens, perhaps hundreds of people, soldiers, monks, villagers, all describing the same impossible sight? Some historians propose the most human answer of all: mass hysteria. They argue that 1519 Italy was a place primed for visions. War, plague, famine, and religious fervor created a perfect storm of fear. When the mind is stretched by suffering, it begins to see what it cannot endure to feel. An army of the dead, then, might have been the imagination's way of giving form to a nation's trauma. But there are problems with that theory. Reports came from distant regions, some over 50 miles apart, describing not only the same event but the same direction of movement, the same armor, even the same ghostly standards fluttering in the wind. Can hysteria synchronize across entire provinces, separated by days of travel? Then there's the meteorological explanation. Some say the phenomenon was a fata morgana, a rare type of mirage where temperature layers in the atmosphere bend light and create ghostly reflections of distant objects. Ships, mountains, even cities have appeared to float in the sky because of it. Perhaps what people saw was the reflection of a distant army, marching far away, but projected into the misty valleys. A fascinating idea, but one that falls apart under scrutiny. A mirage might last minutes, not days. It would shift and distort, not appear in full, perfect detail, with banners, faces, and audible sound. And then there are those who insist the truth is spiritual. In the early 16th century, the boundary between heaven and earth was not a metaphor. People genuinely believed that God and the dead could intervene in the affairs of men. Some priests declared the army was divine punishment for the sins of Italy, gluttony, greed, and endless war. Others saw it as a message of hope, the souls of fallen crusaders returning to guard the faithful in a time of crisis. But there's one detail, often overlooked, that still chills modern researchers. In several eyewitness accounts, the phantom soldiers were described as wearing outdated armor, not from the 1500s but from the 12th or 13th century. Chainmail instead of plate, round shields instead of square. These were the relics of medieval war, not Renaissance battlefields. So who were they? If not living soldiers, were they echoes from the past? Could an event so ancient, so soaked in violence, leave a scar deep enough on the land that it replays itself centuries later? Parapsychologists call this idea a residual haunting, a kind of environmental recording. Energy, trauma, emotion, all imprinted onto a place, like grooves in a record. Under the right conditions, mist, light, atmosphere, that energy might replay. A glimpse of history looping through time. It's not a ghost that thinks or moves with purpose, but a memory of war, forever marching through the Italian hills. And yet, even that explanation cannot account for what came next, because after the Phantom Army vanished, real armies began to die, in numbers no one could comprehend. Famine spread, disease followed. It was as if death itself had marched ahead, clearing the path for centuries of suffering. Was the Ghost Army a vision of what was coming, a spectral prophecy, or something else, something older, darker, still waiting beneath the earth? 500 years have passed. The fields where the Ghost Army was said to appear are quiet now, vineyards and olive groves, the air warm and sweet. But locals say that sometimes when fog drifts down from the mountains, you can still hear faint drums echoing across the valley. Most dismiss it as superstition, but those who've heard the sound, they say it feels too rhythmic, too deliberate to be wind. The legend of the 1519 Ghost Army has become part of Italy's forgotten folklore. You won't find it in school books. Few modern historians even mention it. But hidden in old parish records and dusty monastic letters, the story remains, whispered, half believed, and yet impossible to ignore. Maybe it's because the idea of soldiers condemned to march for eternity touches something deep in us all. A reminder of the price humanity pays for war. Or maybe, just maybe, it's because the veil between past and present is thinner than we think. Every century has its mysteries, the skylights that no one can explain, the voices on the wind that come from nowhere, the echoes that defy time itself. Perhaps what people saw in 1519 was not just a ghost army, but the memory of violence replaying across history, a warning that death never really leaves the battlefield. And perhaps, when the world trembles once more with war and division, they will march again. So tell me, what do you believe? Were they soldiers from another age, a trick of the mind, or a message from beyond reminding the living of the cost of bloodshed? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And remember, every mystery hides a truth. We just have to decide how much of it we're ready to see. This is Mystery Fact File, uncovering the forgotten, the strange, and the unexplained. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind wondering.